He knocked me over. I landed on the dog bowl.
This one's wife. What is she doing? Harry has left. Part 2. Hello. This one's wife is uncharacteristically quiet, so what she's up to? Plenty of people have been speculating, and using the understanding of her possible relationship dynamic, but also her narcissism, this provides us with the ability to take a peek into what's going on in this one's wife's world. Given the fact that they've not been seen together for some time and there has been repeated speculation about the state of their marriage, it's a possibility that they are no longer together, that they have separated, and that quite possibly divorce proceedings are on foot. Nobody knows for certain, but certainly their behaviours have been different from the fact that they were often seen together. In this scenario, Harry has actually gone. He has left her. Her attempts to cause him to stay, her attempts to cause him to remain in the relationship didn't work. He has gone. And he's placed himself in a position whereby he makes it very difficult for her to have any contact with him. He has gone to different places and she doesn't know where he is. And he's made it so that she can't keep ringing him. He has eventually got fed up of the intrusive calls from her and has shifted to an alternative number. Instead, communications, arrangements in relation to the children, it's done through lawyers. Given that as the scenario, and that is the current position that they are at, what is this one's wife doing? How is it affecting her, being the narcissist that she is? Well, first of all, there is the consideration of what is going on vis-a-vis control of Harry. It isn't the case that she sat there pacing up and down, muttering about him every moment of the day. That's going to be far more intermittent. There'll be instances where he's not on the radar, and when that's the case, it's as if he does not exist. The issue of control doesn't become an issue because she's not considering him. He's not on the radar. She'll be focused on other things, and I'll come to what those other things might be presently. Accordingly, there will be instances whereby Harry is not on the radar and therefore her narcissism doesn't need to do anything in relation to him. Nevertheless, even though he has left, he will still keep popping up on the radar because, for instance, the children might mention his name. Somebody else might mention his name. She just happens to think about him. There's something she has to deal with in relation to the lawyers, which prompts her to be reminded of him. She sees a picture of him that she hasn't smashed that's of him. She sees some of his clothing that's still in the house that reminds her of him. There are lots of different ways that he might come up on the radar, even though he isn't contacting her and he's staying completely out of the way. When that happens, her narcissism in the subconscious simply asks this question: is Harry, the former intimate partner primary source, under control? The answer is, we don't know because we're not interacting with him. And therefore it is necessary for her narcissism to get that control, because the first law of narcissism is that all appliances must be brought under control and kept under control. So even though Harry isn't actually there, when he comes up on the radar, her narcissism needs to bring him under control. Now, sometimes the narcissist will do this through hoovering, which is where the narcissist will go and see the victim, ring them up, send them a text message, wrap a note around a brick and throw it through a window. But in this scenario, she's not able to do that because she doesn't know where Harry is, and he's cut off the electronic communications. Accordingly, her narcissism recognizes it's futile to try and hoover him, and therefore that doesn't happen. Instead, her narcissism will move to the second assertion of control, which is she will smear him. She will talk shit about him. She will put him down. It doesn't matter if the children hear, she doesn't care. She will talk ill of him most likely to Doria, to whichever members of the coterie are present, if they happen to be in the house, or by ringing them. She would even do it talking to staff, saying what a shit Harry is and criticising him. Those individuals, either because they're members of her coterie or are lieutenants and therefore supportive of her, or they know better than to disagree with her because they're employed by her, will agree that Harry is indeed a wanker. And in such circumstances, their agreement not only shows that they are under control, but it also affords this one's wife with the notion of control as well. This is the principle of flectes and aqueo superos acherontum vivo, which roughly translated means, if I cannot move heaven, I will raise hell. I.e., if the narcissist cannot control that person directly, the narcissism allows them another opportunity to create the artifice of control in another world, in another way. Thus, if the narcissist can't control you, or this one's wife can't control Harry directly in the traditional sense, it allows her, as a narcissist, to gain a sensation of control by smearing him. So a lot of her time, at the present time, if this scenario is correct, will be spent criticising Harry each and every time he comes up on the radar. And he will be coming up on the radar a lot, even though he's not there. Thus, that enables her to get control. And then he'll come up on the radar an hour later. The narcissism again asks in the subconscious, is he under control? We don't have any data. He's assumed not to be. And that means that she would have to smear him again. If she is not able to smear him, i.e. she's completely on her own and she doesn't call somebody or message them, she will simply jettison the thought of him by dismissing him as a terrible husband and an absent father. This is because he's painted black. And the third assertion of control is to stay in the position of withdrawal. And again, because she can't do anything to him directly, and because the indirect assertion of control isn't available to her, the narcissism is allowed to create the artifice of control by simply saying, I hate him, I don't want anything to do with him ever again. And that affords her the sense of control. Accordingly, you should be able to picture Madam striding around the property at Monte Shitshow, if she's there, cursing Harry, ringing people up and ranting about him, smearing him to anybody that will listen, and in other instances, just ranting to herself about what a despicable human being he is. The other aspect of this is that with Harry gone, it's punched a massive hole in her fuel matrix. For a mid-range narcissist such as her, Harry would probably provide somewhere around about 70% of her general fuel. That's why the intimate partner primary source is so important. And with him gone, she won't necessarily enter a fuel crisis, because what would happen is her narcissism would direct her to move to auxiliary power, if this was a Star Trek episode. So what she would do is she would start to take more fuel from secondary sources instead. For instance, spend more time with the children, spend more time talking to staff, spend more time contacting friends. That, of course, becomes quite draining, because if you think about it this way, imagine that you run a business and your turnover is £1 million. You have one client that you service and they pay you £1 million a year. The upside of that is you only have one CEO that you need to, and his board to keep happy. The downside, of course, is that if you don't keep them happy and they decide to no longer work with you, you haven't got a business anymore and you'll have to go and find a replacement for them pretty quick. Alternatively, if you have 20 clients who are all spending £50,000 with you, then if you lose one, that's not such a problem. If you lose two, it's still not such a problem. You've still got £900,000 coming in. If, for example, you had one client spending £500,000 with you and 10 clients all spending £50,000 with you, and you lose the one that spends £500,000 with you, that's a sizable gap. And therefore what you might then seek to do is try and encourage and get the other clients to increase their expenditure with you to make up the shortfall. But by having to run around dealing with those 10 CEOs rather than just the one that you ordinarily would be dealing with, that becomes a drain on you. So if you just had the one that's spending $1 million with you, that's a lot easier, although there is the risk that if you lose them, it puts you in a difficult position. If you've got 11 to look after, one spending $500,000 and 10 spending the other $500,000, imagine that you could cover the shortfall by causing the others to double their expenditure, but you're having to then to spend a lot of time running around looking after those 10 CEOs, trying to increase their expenditure, keep them happier, and that proves to be a drain. And it would be similar for this one's wife. Accordingly, what is likely to happen is that she would either have to switch to finding a replacement for Harry, i.e. a new intimate partner primary source, and we have no information about that having happened, and it didn't even look like there was anybody in the pipeline, despite the flirtations that we've heard about in the past. Therefore, it will be more likely that what she would do is she would promote a non-intimate secondary source to the position of non-intimate partner primary source, i.e. Doria, that she would rely more and more on her mother for fuel provision to make up the gap caused by Harry's departure. This ultimately would only be a temporary measure, because her narcissism would want her to go and find an intimate partner, because the quality of the fuel would be superior provided by that individual, and of course, that person would be far easier to control with regard to the lashings of spicy poontang, which of course she's not going to be able to utilise with regard to Doria. Accordingly, what is she doing? She is dealing with the aftermath of the loss of Harry, which impacts on her in terms of the dropping of fuel. So she has to then either utilise existing sources more often, which means she's scurrying around dealing with more people, or deal more with Doria. All of that means that that's her time focused elsewhere, which again would explain why we're not seeing much of her, because what she's doing is dealing with the aftermath of Harry's departure to offset the loss of that fuel and to deal with the damage that's caused to her by his wounding originating from his departure. She would also, of course, be losing character traits and residual benefits associated with Harry. She'd also perhaps be having to deal with the machinery associated with his departure with regard to instructing lawyers if that has happened. Accordingly, all of this would mean she'd have a lot on her plate caused by the loss. A non-narcissist, of course, having the demise of a relationship would be upset, and whilst they wouldn't be scurrying around for fuel, they would still have things that they would need to do. They may have to deal with an impending divorce, they may have to deal with arrangements with children, they may have to deal with arrangements with regard to property and so forth. But they wouldn't have the preoccupation of trying to seek fuel, but the narcissist does. And when the narcissist, such as a mid-range one, loses that intimate partner primary source in terms of fuel provision, that is particularly problematic. Not only has the narcissist suffered massive wounding by the departure of Harry, but then she has to do something about replacing that fuel, and that could be rather time-consuming. Thus, dealing with all of the sort of mechanical and day-to-day stuff originating from a potential divorce and the demise of the relationship occupies some of her time, but also the fact that she now needs to go and get fuel from lots of different places rather than just one, or rely on him more than usual. Remember, she wouldn't have relied upon him 100%. If you want to understand more about the way that a narcissist fuel matrix works, read my excellent book Pipelines, and also obtain Understanding Changes to the Narcissist Fuel Matrix. You'll find both of those in the Knowledge Vault. That will help you understand the different types of fuel matrix that different narcissists have, and then how those fuel matrices are affected when certain aspects are removed. It can then help you understand precisely what this one's wife is experiencing. In essence, not only will she have some day-to-day admin to deal with, but the fact is, She'll be preoccupied with trying to make good the hole in her fuel matrix whilst dealing with the plummeting fuel levels, which will be making her anxious, and she would be having the ignitions of fury, etc. All of that is time consuming. All of that means that she hasn't got the time to be doing the pap walks in car parks or turning up with a rictus grin at some awards ceremony. Thus, it could quite possibly be the case that the reason that we haven't been seeing her is because Harry has left and she's busy dealing with the aftermath. Do you think that's a possibility? Do you think that's why we've not seen much of her? That she is dealing with the aftermath of Harry's departure in terms of the actual machinery, mechanics and admin, alongside the fact that she has lost a major fuel provider? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.